where I sit.
Hey, Charles.
Hey, Jen.
Hey. Where are you going to watch all those Kraken away games?
Kraken away games, making a push. I was thinking of coming here just because Rough and Tumble is the home of Circling Seattle Sports, only if that's okay with you.
I mean, I love that idea. Hope to see you here.
Oh boy. Well, yeah, there's that. Welcome to Circling Seattle Sports. We haven't really done a live video before. I know RJ and Emerald City Hockey, they're so good at the post-game lives that I'm like, well, I get used to that and tune into that. And then sometimes I get mentioned, which is always scary. But yeah, the trade deadline has come and gone for the NHL. There were some pretty big moves around the league. We're not too concerned with that, at least in the moment. I don't know if any of those players that were moved or not moved, if you're Vancouver, will ever end up here. But the Kraken did some light selling. I think we all kind of expected some light selling, right? Not really the full fire sale that some fans might have wanted. That's up for debate, whether that's a good or a bad thing. Wink, wink. But yeah, so we'll get to it here. We'll start, obviously, wrong side. RJ from Emerald City Hockey is to my left. We've got Jayd down there, more in the center. Jayd and I do the Keeping Up with the Seattle Kraken podcast every week. Obviously, RJ, if you know Emerald City Hockey, they do the God, you guys just do so much. I mean, there's Red Glare is more of a Patreon thing, if I remember correctly. You've got the deep dive. The Armchair GM, though, is the one thing that I do want to spotlight for these guys. Since RJ is doing one of those tonight, that's at 7:00 Pacific time, if I'm correct. So make sure if you want to look at, more great stuff, regarding the Kraken. Obviously, we do a bunch here and we do some Kraken stuff, but RJ and Emerald City Hockey do a lot of great things. And Armchair GM is one of them. It's always very fascinating to get his thoughts on that. So yeah, check out their Patreon. That will happen tonight. You've got a few hours before that. So we'll just get into things, guys. The big moves started yesterday, a day or two ago, right? With Seattle moving on from Yanni Gourde and Oliver Bjorkstrand, packaging them in a deal that I didn't really expect to get this much. I thought that maybe this is just me being a pessimist with Ron, that they wouldn't be able to get that much. Excuse me. But the Kraken were able to make out pretty well, getting 2 first-rounders that have conditions on them. Those were big conditions. A second-rounder in 25, as well as Mikey Asamont. I almost said Michael. I had to get that correct. Don't want to be wrong. It's just like the whole Matty Beniers thing over again when they told us you have to say Matty. And Seattle sent a 2026 5th-rounder as well. No retaining on Oliver Bjorkstrand was a big deal. We'll look at this trade, the Tanev trade. I don't think we need to spend much time on the Sprong trade unless anyone has objections to that.
All right.
And then we'll see how we feel about the post deadline. RJ, I want to get your thoughts since you are our guest here. We want to treat our guests well. And Jayd, will go to you on this Tampa Bay trade, because Yanni Gourde, that seemed like a name we all talked about. We all thought would move on, considering how much he counted against the cap. He's getting older and he's going to be a free agent at the end of the year, right? I guess I didn't know if we'd expect it the night after we asked him about that, right? But just your thoughts on the trade to the Lightning and what Seattle was able to receive from that.
Well, first off, thanks for having me on. It's great to join you for one of these. I always have a great time with you, especially today on trade deadline day at KCI as we watch kind of all the news unfold. But always good company speaking with you, and especially for everyone to watch right now. As for the Yanni Gourde and Oliver Bjorkstrand trade, I thought this was a great deal for the Kraken. Fantastic value for a couple players that, Gourde was kind of headed out the door anyway. And then Oliver Bjorkstrand did have a year left of term, but they do move him here. And as Ron Francis said today, when a team kind of meets your price, why wait to make a deal? And I have to imagine that this was at Ron Francis's price, or maybe a little bit higher than that, just given the return here. I mean, 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick, the centerpiece in this deal, and especially with Oliver Bjorkstrand. I think one of the key elements of this deal is the Kraken did not have to retain any money on Oliver Bjorkstrand. Any retained money would also go toward next year, so they clear that contract off the books completely for next year. Yanni Gourde goes as well, and really the point of this trade is just to build up ammunition for this offseason to go out and make further trades to add immediate help. I mean, you look at those 2 draft picks, they are top 10 protected. For right now, they're 2026 and 2027. If those picks finish top 10, they could slide to as late as 2028 and 2029. That is a long ways out, but really, I would be surprised if the Kraken actually were the team to make either one of these picks. I could see both of them going this offseason.
Yeah. Jay, do you have anything on top of that just with this trade respectively? Because I'm already excited to just talk about, the resources and the ammunition that RJ brings up. But I know I want to keep us in order here. I know I get excited and I try to go ahead myself.
I don't have very much else to say on top of what RJ said. I think that you summed it up really well. And I guess the only thing is after talking to Yanni Gourde on, was that Tuesday night?
Tuesday, yeah, against Minnesota.
After talking to him that night, I kind of had the vibe that he was going to be leaving, just based on what he was saying as far as like extension talks go. And, I can only control showing up and doing my job and things like that. I had a hunch. But yeah, aside from that, I don't have very much else to add.
Yeah. And Yanni was asked, about the extension, because there were reports about him potentially signing an extension as opposed to being traded, right? And I just kind of felt like, I think we all love Yanni Gourde, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's what he brings on the ice, the smiling in scrums, or even just interacting with the guy, right? Great human being, great family as well. But just with, I think, extending a guy that's no higher than a 4th liner, right, anymore is a mistake, right? I know Ron's made some of those with contracts before, so I think I was a little worried about that. But yeah, I mean, it's great. I think it's not like you were sending him to a division rival or anything. Like, for him to go back to Tampa Bay is really fun. But I think what was interesting, and Kate Shefty, I think, got with the Seattle Times, got this exclusive, is that there was never a deal in front of him. It was just, if this Tampa Bay deal didn't go through, then they would look at something like that. So that was a little bit interesting to me, at least. And then, not to completely put Mikey Asimon in the corner and be like, oh, you're here too. I don't know. I mean, he seems like an interesting guy, kind of a bottom 6 guy, certainly gets into things. I mean, we saw that last night in Nashville, isn't afraid to get involved, and he shoots a lot, which anybody who yells shoot the puck, whether that's at CBA or at home, will hopefully enjoy that. He spends the rest of the season here. He is a free agent at the end of the season. I don't know if Seattle has any plans to bring him back. I'm sure they've got more important things, per se, to look at. The Tanev trade, just like with Yanni Gourde, I mean, that was expected, right? We expected him to move. I thought maybe that would be something that gets taken care of earlier in the season, but then you get some other trades that go down. Injuries with Jordan Eberle going down, and it just didn't. I'm sure it didn't make sense at the time. It was interesting hearing from Ron Francis today at the Kraken Community Iceplex after the deadline had officially passed, saying that this deal with Winnipeg specifically didn't really come to play until this morning. I'm a little fascinated by that, because I have to imagine they wanted to move him, given he was really just a fourth liner. They'd moved him up before, as RJ knows, like with guys, when we build the lineup, like over the last few years, they'll occasionally bump him up. It's always very fascinating to see that. But I think
sorry if I don't want to cut you off here, Charles.
No,
but,
you're good.
One thing that Francis did say about the deal coming together kind of late was that maybe Tanev being more of a depth guy was a reason behind it, because teams were looking at some of the top players first.
Bigger
So
deals.
those dominoes had to fall first before you had teams maybe circle back around to depth guys.
Yeah.
Kind of following on that. Again, sorry to cut you off. But I know that with Gourde and, like, for example, Scott Lawn, there's a handful of people that teams that I know that other teams were looking at, and it was kind of a toss up of who's going to be the first to kind of bite with that. So there were a handful of trades that I was expecting to not see until the last minute, or, you know, the last hour, considering that was an insane 60 minutes. But
yeah, surely you expected Brad Marchand, you know, to go to Florida. I mean, we all knew that. Well, and then there was Vegas popping in and just tweeting hi, like, shut up.
But yeah, there was a couple things where I was like, I don't really know. You know, you can predict what's going to happen all you want. You can throw out hypotheticals and ideas, but nothing's ever guaranteed.
Yeah, no. I think my biggest thing with, because, you know, it was expected to me. I mean, they wanted to move on from him. I think just like Yanni extending Brandon Tanev would have been a mistake this offseason. And there's no guarantee he would have even wanted to come back here, right? The big thing, though, to me is we got some people who are kind of upset at the fact that they got, yes, it's a second rounder, but it's not till 27. I mean, RJ, do you have any thoughts on this? Just because it is a few drafts away. I didn't personally care that much. It is a second rounder. It's within the first 2 rounds. And we'll get to this, but yeah, it just, the focus is on the ammunition. Because as Ron Francis said, and I hope it's true, that they're not going to draft 10 players with their 10 first or second round picks in the next 3 selections.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of tap the sign again and just say, look, draft picks are currency. These are picks that are going to be flipped for more immediate help in the offseason. And so it just gives you, again, essentially more currency to go ahead and do that. As for the pick being later, I do think it's part of an interesting trend that we are starting to see at this deadline where teams will trade away picks. I can't remember another trade deadline where so many picks 2 and 3 years out were exchanged for players. And it does kind of make sense to me that that's the logical progression that it would take in the league, because as a GM, you never know how long you're going to have the job that you're in. And so if you just send assets further down the road, it's less likely that you're going to actually have to worry about not having those assets. And then also, okay, well, why would you want to receive those type of assets then? As a GM, it also allows you to maybe make a trade return look a little better. If it's a third round pick this year compared, there's a time value of all assets. If it's a third round pick this year versus a second round pick 2 years out, you can then claim, I got a second for this player rather than a third. And so it kind of just looks good all around.
Yeah. And that, again, I don't think we need to touch on Daniel Sprong too much. I think the biggest thing with Daniel Sprong is that he was a guy who, maybe this is too much discourse, but I don't think I almost called him Daniel Bilesma. Not going to do that. That Dan Bilesma liked too much or saw as someone he wanted as a night-to-night contributor. They got him for essentially nothing, right? In future considerations, not to put down future considerations. And, whatever commentary you might have on the guy, whether it's the fact that he needs to be sheltered, so on and so forth, it didn't work out, and he'd been hanging out in Coachella Valley for a while. And I think this was one that hadn't gone through because of the backlog of other deals. We didn't find out that the Kraken had moved anybody. We had just been told it was a minor deal. And I think right as Ron was getting done talking to us, the news came out, and he kind of sheepishly was like, yes, it's someone in Coachella Valley. So, hey, I think like RJ said, or whoever tweets for Emerald City Hockey. I don't know if you guys do the whole intern thing like Sound of Hockey does.
No, we don't mess around with stuff like that. It is me. Everyone can know that. Don't need to hide
keep your
behind
intern in a cage.
Label. No, we do not keep anybody in a cage. Unlike any allegations that I may be hearing about Sound of Hockey, we do not keep anyone in a cage.
No comment. We're getting spicy on here, apparently. But yeah, I mean, it's just a new opportunity for the guy who, the offense is there. That's no doubt. But there's other stuff. So, and it's the 7th rounder. I mean, hey, maybe that 7th rounder ends up being somebody. I don't know. So yeah, you've got, as Ron kind of hammered home a few times when he was talking to us, and even when he was talking to Kate after the Gord Bjorkstrand deal, right? Like, they've got all these selections, 10 total, split between the first and the second round over the next 3 years. And then at least how it stands right now, because things can happen, usually right after the season, in terms of a Grubauer buyout. Milo, if you're hearing this, please cover your ears. Or a Burakovsky. I mean, there was the stuff earlier in the season about Andre Burakovsky, someone having interest in him. And I don't know if you disagree with this, RJ, but I was saying if someone wants him, just give the guy up. Like, it's just how it is. Unfortunately, it's just a free agent signing that didn't pan out. But yeah, who knows what you do with him? I don't know how much I expect him to be on the roster in 2025, 26. But how things stand right now, you've got those 10 picks over the course of 3 years in the first 2 rounds, and then 20 million, just a little under 21 million in cap space. Like, this is a great opportunity because whenever I think of the cap space, I think of what you do on Armchair GM, right? And don't to give me all of your secrets, but I don't know. What are you hoping for in terms of the off season? Because that is a lot of ammunition. The talk, even with Todd Lewicki on the radio, right, on the President's Day show, they keep refuting a rebuild, right? We keep hearing about a retool. So they obviously want to be competitive next year. That's going to require, I'm sure, some big swings this offseason. I don't know. What are you expecting? Are you expecting just like a one big guy kind of thing? Because the other part of having the trade resources is that someone has to be willing to give somebody up, right? That'll happen, right? With guys being shaken loose because of cap stuff. That's how all of your Bjorkstrand apps here ended up here, right? So guys end up not being happy. I know there's some guys with teams who sold at the deadline who might be upset, right? And might want out. So I don't know. What are you, I guess, generally looking for, considering that Seattle has all of these assets?
Well, there's what I'm hoping for and what I'm expecting, and those are maybe two different things. I'll start with what I'm hoping for, and that's that the Kraken use those assets, use that cap space to go big game hunting and land a proper star forward. Those guys are not usually available, so it's going to be a challenge for sure. I mean, some names that it might be options, I guess. Mitch Marner still has not signed an extension anywhere. He's going to be a pending UFA. I mean, he would be in that class of players that I would classify as a proper star forward. Other names, like especially with the Bruins selling off today and Brad Marchand, maybe David Pastrnak wants out and the Bruins field calls for him. The Kraken could put together an offer there. The big problem I see with really any of these guys, whether it's Pastrnak, whether it's Marner, just about anybody, any player that is that good is either like Marner going to be a free agent and can kind of command their price and their destination, or they're going to have significant trade protection like a David Pastrnak, a full no move clause. And so any way you slice it, it's not just about the money or having the assets to send to another team, but such a player would have to want to come to Seattle. And just given the state of this team, of this roster, of this build, I don't know how many players are signing up for a team that you're going to have to be able to convince them that you can be competitive. And I just don't know how you do that given the build that you currently have. So I think it's going to be an uphill battle to convince somebody to come to Seattle. So that's what I would hope for. And I hope to hear the Kraken involved in conversations around very big names. And I'm sure they will make a push. I think they're certainly going to try. But what I'm expecting more or less is that those really top guys probably either are not going to want to come to Seattle or they're not going to be able to get a deal done. And you're going to have to probably go to that second tier of forwards and maybe free agents. I mean, Brock Besser is one of those guys. Nick Ehlers is another one of those guys. Maybe those are the types of names that they'll actually be sniffing around. I don't think either of those two guys are really good enough to put them over the hump, but those might be the more realistic names. Not to be too negative on here, but that's just kind of where I think it might end up heading. There might be some other players available via trade, but it's going to be really tough to actually use the assets in the cap space for anybody that is an actual star forward.
Yeah, Jayd, before I get into a tangent, do you have anything on just the resources allocated here? Because I mean, again, like on paper, this is nice. It's nice to see all this money, right? And it's not like baseball where I have to worry about even spending any money. But
yeah. Once again, I largely agree with RJ. Besser is one of the bigger names that I think it might be a little bit more appealing to Seattle. Seattle might be a little bit more appealing to him. Just given the closeness and distance, and it's not that much. It's a little bit different from Vancouver, obviously, but it's not like that much further away. But yeah, I am just kind of, I don't know. Yeah, That's
It
pretty
just
much it.
seems like I need to see you do something.
Yeah,
You
which
know,
is just kind of how I felt all season. I need to see a different move. I need to see a better trade than what we've seen so far.
yeah,
And that's understandable too. I think one of the reasons for my pessimism and maybe yours, and again, sorry to cut you off for a second time there, Charles, is that if Ron Francis is in fact the person in charge and he has to go out and trade for a star player, throughout his entire career as a GM, I think the best player that he has ever traded for is Oliver Bjorkstrand. And not to take anything away from Oliver Bjorkstrand, but he's a middle six winger. I mean, we haven't seen Francis trade for anybody who's even close to a star player in his career as a GM. And so until he actually goes ahead and does it, I have no reason to believe that he can.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And that's if I'm wrong, you can tell me I'm wrong, which a lot of people do on the internet, but they're usually angrier than that. But I think, and it might have been actually on a deep dive, but I remember I think it was an ECH piece of content, I'll say, that this was on, that, there have been a lot of players that have been available via trade or were traded per se over the course of Ron Francis's tenure as the general manager, and Seattle hasn't landed any of them, right? I mean, I remember the names like Jacob Chikrin being involved. Bo Horvat was traded earlier into the Kraken's existence, right? There have been a lot of names that have been moved, and Seattle has gotten, again, Oliver Bjorkstrand's great. I think Oliver Bjorkstrand is a player that is on a championship roster, right? You need an Oliver Bjorkstrand, in my opinion. I'm not saying he's your top guy, but those guys certainly make an impact on the cup run. And that's what your top trade is. Like, Capo Caco could end up being that guy, but also he's gonna be a free agent at the end of the year, right? So you have to be able to bring him back. How does he want to be back? Is it on a shorter term deal? That's for a different discussion. So yeah, I mean, I get it, I understand it, and even if they do land a Besser, how much of an overpay would it be, right? I mean, if he really wants to be here and you don't have to do that, excellent. That's a great scenario, but I'm especially with what they did with Stevenson and Brandon Montour, like, I'm wondering how much of this cap space that I'm looking at and I'm salivating over gets eaten up because you had to just throw in a little bit more to convince somebody to be here, right? So, yeah, no, I mean, I understand the pessimism. Even the Ron thing is something that's interesting to me because people go, "Oh, I don't trust him to use these resources, do the right thing, and make the right moves." I don't know if it's a guarantee that he'll be here. I mean, kind of like we've just said with the talk about waiting to see something happen. I just have grown so used to them not making the big move or ripping off the Band-Aid that and I texted RJ the day this happened because I ended up recording in the middle of Westlake Park because I was so shocked that it happened. I was surprised that they waived Philip Grubauer. I was surprised that they owned up to that to an extent, right? He's back now. I imagine he'll finish the season out here. RJ, you did ask Ron about if anyone else went down to be eligible for the Calder Cup playoffs, and obviously he's not, so they're not going to have him down there. I wonder if this is a franchise that will stay stagnant in that regard as well, and be fine with Ron continuing to try and fix the mess that he's kind of put this franchise in, right? I don't know. I'd be really shocked, honestly. Maybe in a more positive note, I'd love to hear some thoughts about call-ups because I think this is where we're at, right? As a franchise now, I think this is what we all, as folks who cover the team, will be looking forward to, is who gets called up. I thought maybe, and he could still come back, but I thought maybe Jacob Melanson might hang out around here. I know he's a guy that a lot of Kraken media folks enjoyed until he broke his leg down in Coachella Valley earlier in the year. I think it would be cool to get Yanni Newman some run just because of how well he's performed in his rookie season in the AHL. But yeah, I guess Jayd and I know we did an episode on, or well, part of an episode on this a few weeks ago because we've just kind of been in this state, right? RJ, for you, what do you want to see? Because I know Dylan, to talk about the Patreon again, does sort of the prospect chat, right, and looks at that for you guys. But is there anybody that you're hoping to get a glimpse at in some Kraken blue and red before the season gets done.
Well, the guy I'm most excited about, and he's someone that Ron Francis, I think, talked about on KJR when speaking after the trade deadline today, is Yanni Newman, who it sounds like he will get a call up at some point this season for the Kraken, and I'm really excited about that because I mean he is one of the top scorers already as a rookie in the AHL. He's one of the top scorers in the league. He has an NHL level shot, as Dylan says to me, Bloody. He has an NHL level shot already, which is just really impressive at this point. The skating does need some work, and I'm sure that'll be especially exposed at the NHL level when he does get the call up, but he's young. He's 20 years old. He's got time to work on that. But Yanni Newman is probably the most potentially exciting guy to see. I might like to see a little bit of Edward Chalet, if that's a possibility as well. But then, I mean, Ryan Winterton also, like he basically made the roster out of training camp. It's just for cap reasons, they weren't allowed to have him up. He has not been one of the call-ups really this year when they've gone to guys. And so I wonder if there's maybe a plan for him to get more games down the stretch, just even as a fourth liner, because I think he fits a little better for those spots than maybe some of the guys that they have to call up now. But it sounds like that's not the plan initially, at least, since they called up John Hayden, who's more of a veteran, more of a fighter in that role.
Yeah, I'm interested in, like, Charlie's one that I maybe unfortunately, and it's not on purpose, that I kind of forgets down there. He had the great World Juniors. It's really nice to see him having fun. Edward seems to be having fun when he's posting a bunch online.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, that's a guy obviously with what didn't have the greatest time in the OHL last year, right? With what got traded to Kitchener, with Carson Rakoff, didn't have the best time. He seems to be fitting in well here. I want to go to this because we've got the comments in here. So if we've got you on here, RJ, do you have any thoughts on them not trading McCann? We've got Ending Soonest on YouTube asked, should we have traded McCann, or we just not offered much back? I don't think they wanted to move McCann. Ron's comment said that we're not taking calls on Mr. McCann. I thought it was funny, called him Mr.
Yeah.
I went on a long rant, I think last episode, about not trading a guy like Jared McCann. I said, though, if the right deal came about, then it makes sense. Like if you're making a deal that brings you someone that elevates you as a franchise, you have to, right? But I don't know. What did you think at all if Jared McCann, the potential of that, him being moved?
Yeah, I don't think the Kraken were ever looking to move Jared McCann at the deadline this year. There were reports of other teams calling about him, but I just don't think that's a move that Ron Francis wanted to make. And I think that actually does make sense. Even at the deadline, with the prices inflated the way that they are, you're not just selling off McCann for futures. That kind of move doesn't make any sense for the Kraken. If you are going to trade Jared McCann, you are using him as a piece in a larger deal to get that star forward that we talked about. And so that's an off-season trade. That's not the kind of deal that usually happens at the deadline. Unless you're one of those contenders, for Rantanen, where you can, do the sign and trade type of thing that Dallas did. But again, Rantanen wouldn't have wanted to come to Seattle. So that's an off-season type of trade. If you are going to make it, I'm not saying they will, but it just didn't make any sense to move him at the deadline this year.
Yeah, and I should have said this with Yanni Newman, but it was interesting that Ron Francis on the radio today said that Yanni Newman, who he brought up to us, as I mentioned, right, today after the deadline. He said that Yanni Newman has a Mikko Rantanen type of shot. And I'm like, hey, all right. I mean, that could be fun.
High praise.
Yeah, that's feels like a lot of pressure to give the kid, but so I don't know. It's going to be really interesting this offseason. We've got a long time before we really get there. But I think the last sort of thing that I want to touch on before we let you go and pump more towards your armchair GM, there's a few younger players that the Kraken will have end up as free agents to some extent. I think they're both RFAs, if I'm correct, with Capo Caco and Riker Evans. Those are two guys that, we talk a lot about. I've mentioned the $20 million in cap space and can go up with other moves. What do you think? This might be a little too early to ask, but what do you think deals for those guys look like? Are we looking at shorter term deals? And it could be different for either guy, right? But I think, again, to reference ECH lore here and ECH content, you've mentioned that, Capo might be wanting to bet on himself more and sign more of a shorter term deal, right? To get a bigger thing. Like, I don't think he's ready to sit his bags down and be in Seattle for 6-7 years, whatever. And then with Riker Evans, I mean, I feel like his name kind of goes quieter with contract talks. Maybe since he's younger, or he isn't like this splashy player per se, but his ELC is done after this season. He becomes an RFA. What does that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, with Capo Caco, I think it's going to be really interesting what this looks like, because you have the numbers in New York that were not all that impressive. He gets to Seattle and does great in a limited sample size, and I just love what he's brought to the Kraken. And so, if you're him at age 24 as an RFA, you have the option to maybe go shorter term and try and bet on yourself a little bit. I think the Kraken might want to go longer term, but is that going to be an option? At the end of the day, it depends on what plans I think the Kraken have for any additional cap space they'd gain by going shorter term, because a shorter term deal is going to have a lower cap hit. That's just kind of how it's going to work for a bridge deal. And a longer term is going to command a larger cap hit, especially with the cap going up so much. So if the Kraken, if they're out chasing a star, if they somehow find a way to sign Mitch Marner and need an extra couple $1 million, maybe they do go shorter term with Capo Caco. The leverage that Caco has, though, ultimately, is he does have arbitration rights. And so if he wants, he can elect for arbitration and get that 1 or 2 year award, and that kind of contract will steer him to unrestricted free agency. And so he can kind of elect and do that short-term deal via arbitration if he wants to do that. The money might not be what he wants, but the term could be what he wants. Very few of these cases actually go to arbitration. I think Caco and the Kraken would really like to avoid that, but that is just kind of this hammer of leverage that he does have in his back pocket to get the term he wants potentially. But I really don't know what this contract's going to look like. Sorry, who else did you ask about?
Oh, Riker, just because, he's going to be an RFA. I just wonder what you think about that. Because, again, I feel like we talked so much about the other D-men. I was wondering if Jamie Alexiak would go at this deadline just because of what, some other D-men were fetching in terms of their return. But I also know that, again, going back to that piece that Kate got, he said he wasn't too thrilled to move guys with term, and they didn't do that outside of Oliver Bjorkstrand. So I just wonder what he gets, because I mean, he's only 23. He's one of your first drafted players ever. He's had a solid game. I'm sure he'll only get better. I just wonder what that looks like for him, because I know he kind of has less chips to play per se than Capo does.
Yeah, well, I think with Riker Evans, that's one where I'd be, I guess, less surprised to see it go longer term. I think that's something where team and player could maybe agree on something, and Riker Evans could get a little bit more security. If you look at the projection from AFP Analytics on a long-term deal, and this is a couple months old, but it's, I believe, 6 years at about $5 million a year cap hit for Riker Evans. And honestly, I would take that contract all day. I think that's fantastic, especially with how much the cap is going up. You can kind of lock him in at a bargain price. I think he'd probably command a little bit more than that on a 6-year deal in reality. That's just kind of what their model said a few months ago. But I think it's something the Kraken will really want to look into, and especially if it's Ron Francis in charge. You look back to his history in Carolina and the Jacob Slavin deal, and I believe Brett Pesce, he also signed that contract as well. He has a history of taking young defensemen who he feels really good about and the organization feels really good about, and taking a bit of a risk and signing them to a longer term deal, but locking in a really good price. And I have to think that Riker Evans is somebody the Kraken would like to do that on. So if Evans is game, then I say, I'm all for it. Sign him to a longer term deal, lock in that price. And I think that's something the Kraken will look to do.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they have any sort of, I don't know. I don't think they have any negative knocks against the guy. Again, they've seen him come up through their system dating back to what was he a checker? I think when they still had to split.
I don't remember. That's a good question. I don't remember if he was.
Not super relevant, but you get the point.
But they drafted him as an overager, which is a little bit more of a risk there in the second round. And they've just loved him from the very beginning. And I think, if you're going to sign a player to term and you're going to take a risk like that, do it on your own guys, do it on your draft picks that you've had from the very beginning, and lock those guys in. So that's kind of I think the right way to do it.
Okay. He never played a game as a checker. He was with Regina and then went straight to Coachella. Got it. Okay, wanted to be correct. I said that was the last one, but maybe I'll throw this one at you because I don't want to leave the folks in the comments unhappy. Someone said, Jamie should have been on the trade block. I mean, it also depends. Like maybe Seattle just I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on Alexiak not being moved at this deadline? Because again, there's no guarantee that he might get moved this offseason. It's very fascinating to me with regards to the defense, and I know you've talked about this on post games and other ways. Just with the decor probably needs to be broken up a bit, right? Just with how things have gone. I do think it's fascinating that like largely the same decor, sans a Montour and a Mahura, and now obviously Will Borgen is gone. Not to give anybody shocks that are Will Borgen fans, but just to see how poorly they've played, and to see how bad things are. Alexiak's got another year in his deal after this. Just, I guess, any thoughts you had on Jamie not being moved and still being a Kraken at this point, and maybe if you have any thoughts on his future.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I was a little disappointed not to see him moved at the deadline this year, just given some of the prices that other defensemen were going for. When Luke Schen's going for a second plus, you got to think that Jamie Alexiak, had you been willing to pull the trigger, probably could go for a first at least, especially if Francis was willing to retain money. So I was kind of hoping a deal like that might materialize. Ended up not really coming together. And it's not the end of the world because you still have him. He's still a valuable asset in the offseason. It's fine. But just given how much of a seller's market there was, I don't know. I was really hoping that Francis would find something. Again, he still met all of my kind of reasonable expectations at the deadline, but that would have been a chance, I think, to go above and beyond that was missed.
Yeah. That's as soon as I saw like maybe I don't think you had any ties to him, but Jake Wallman. I saw that deal, and I saw a few others.
Oh yeah, that's another
one. Probably should move the guy, depending on what you could get. So, yeah, no, I mean it'll be really interesting to see. I think closer to the draft, that's something that Ron mentioned is when picks, picks, yes, but trades kind of pick up there. So maybe we'll do something closer to that as well. I'd love to, again, depending what the Kraken do, this is going to be a really interesting offseason with how much they're hammering home that we're not going to use all of our picks and. The fact that they do want to spin the block and get a lot better. Even though Ron highlighted that they were 5.5 games or something out of, it. Yeah, it's going to be
on that.
So yeah, that's where I'll wrap it up. I hope I got all the comments that I wanted to address that because I was like, hey, we're live. We should probably look at what people are saying. RJ, again, this is a great sort of, partially why I wanted to do this, in addition to having you guys on, is always fun to have because, my little brain doesn't get everything. Is because it is a glimpse into the armchair GM. I'll be sitting here at my computer later watching that and hearing the nice tones of RJ speaking later. What can you say about armchair GM and what that entails for folks who aren't yet on the Patreon list like I am?
Right. So every month I do an armchair GM stream. So that's a live stream. I mean, kind of like this is a live stream where but where, I kind of step into Ron Francis' shoes a little bit and look at the Kraken from a roster perspective, from a salary cap perspective. And this month is tonight. Of course, I scheduled it for trade deadline day. So we're going to go over the moves that the Kraken made, go into a little more depth about some of the things that we talked about here with you and with Jayd, the different moves they made, how that's going to set them up for what is going to be a very active offseason, as Ron Francis has said, and look a little bit into the future and kind of see what they're going to do. So that's a live stream, and it is a Patreon perk. So it's something we do for our Terror of the Deep level patrons. And so it is $10 a month for that. But if you just want to try it out for free, you can do that. You get a free trial to the Patreon. It's a 7-day free trial. It doesn't cost you anything. Just sign up for the trial and you can catch that tonight. And also our live game commentary, because another thing we do is we watch a Kraken game together. I'll kind of do a live stream where we watch all the game together. We've got a live chat going, and we're going to do that tomorrow morning for the Kraken Flyers game, bright and early, 9:30 a.m. start time. And so with that 7-day free trial, you can catch both of those, try them out, see if you like it, see if it's for you. Hoping to see some of you there. Ooh, I like the little banner there. Thank you.
Yeah,
so good at helping the guests plug stuff.
Probably should have done that earlier, but no, I mean, again, like I always like doing this stuff with RJ because when I started covering this team early into CSS's journey, RJ was very patient with me as I, learned the hockey sport. And it's good content, right? Like I always enjoy pushing that because it's insightful, to hear what they're talking about. And I obviously referenced a few of those throughout the course of the day. So, I just hope that whatever you do on the Armchair GM, you don't retain half of Brad Marchand's salary like the Boston Bruins just did.
In exchange
at
for a
least
second round pick.
in exchange for
I
a
think I can
second round
avoid that.
pick. So, maybe don't do that. Good sell, RJ. Yes, he does a good job at that.
Thank you, Sean.
He gets my
Appreciate
money
that.
every month. So that'll wrap it up. So that'll be great. Again, that is at 7:00 tonight for the Armchair GM Pacific time. I'm just so used to saying that. I've never lived anywhere else in my life besides the Pacific time zone. Hopefully at least the Kraken games throughout the year to close the season are somewhat entertaining, right? Because it's going to look interesting as we close the year out. So until we see you next time, go check out ECH, of course. As you can see, there's a banner at the bottom to tell you where to go. Fascinating. Until we see you next time, take care of yourselves. Be well. Subscribe to ECH on Patreon and do whatever you can to make today a great day.
Hey, Charles.
Hey, Jen.
Hey. Where are you going to watch all those Kraken away games?
Kraken away games, making a push. I was thinking of coming here just because Rough and Tumble is the home of Circling Seattle Sports, only if that's okay with you.
I mean, I love that idea. Hope to see you here.